Hello and welcome to the Strong Suit Podcast, where we focus on the people part of your business. Every Tuesday and Thursday, I interview a world-class expert on talent and recruiting so that you can build a company filled with rock stars. And I am so pumped to have my guest today, and fabulous author, Alex Salkever. How are you, Alex?
Very good, Jeff. Thank you very much for having me on.
You're a repeat guest, and I'm so happy to have you back because we are one of the first to talk about your brand new book. Just came out, a few weeks ago, right?
It came out about a month ago, and it came out late June, which is, if you're an author, bad time to release a book. Better to release it in the fall or the spring, but yes.
Well, congratulations. The name of it is Your Happiness Was Hacked: Why Tech is Winning, the Battle to Control Your Brain and How to Fight Back. Very relevant topic these days because it covers happiness, which is in the news. Sleep is a big part of it. We're going to talk about that. Hacking, obviously. So it's just the perfect timing. And I'm really interested in kind of what inspired you to write about this. And then we'll spend about 15, 20 minutes talking about how this topic pertains to recruiting the best talent. So what got you started down this path, Alex?
I've been, like you probably, and like many of your listeners, essentially a tech addict for a number of years, like constantly on email, constantly checking texts, reading the internet. And I didn't think it was necessarily a bad thing. I kind of knew that it ate away at certain habits, but I didn't really stop to ponder it very much. And then maybe 2 or 3 years ago, I almost had a pretty tragic accident. I was driving and there was a very important work conversation going on over text.
Yep.
And I felt compelled to sort of pay attention to it. I was on a windy road on the California coast, which is dangerous enough to drive anyway. And every time the curve straightened out, I would look down at my phone. And then one time I'm on a curve, I look up and there's a group of 4 cyclists about 15 feet ahead of me. And I slammed on the brakes. If I had hit them, they would have gone over the cliffs, probably would have died. Probably would have been a very different life for me after that as well.
Sure.
And looking down at the phone after that, I thought, what am I doing? What is so important?
It is so ridiculous in that moment
Exactly.
You've all been guilty of it. You're like, wait a sec, I got the kids in the back and this car almost hit me and I'm texting about some crap.
Exactly. Something that I wouldn't even remember in a week, let alone 20 years.
Sure.
And from that, I just started to do an assessment of, how am I interacting with technology? Does it make me feel better or worse? Is it adding to my life or subtracting from my life? So and from that emerged the book.
So I think it's great. The title is Your Happiness Was Hacked. What's the premise around happiness and how technology has helped or hurt? I don't want the listeners to assume anything from the title.
No, and to be fair, in the book, we talk quite a bit about how to balance technology and in normal life or happiness, because part of the conceit of the book is that you can no longer avoid technology. I mean, for example, if you're out recruiting someone and they tell you, by the way, I don't do email, well, cross them right off the list, right? I mean, it's not like you can opt out. It's much more of how do you create a healthy interaction and a healthy lifestyle that weaves tech into a positive way in your life. Now, many of the companies that are selling technology products or monetizing technology, they don't necessarily have that same view. Their view, whether it's explicit or implicit, is the more you consume, the better it is for us. And we see this in the attention economy with advertising, for example, with Facebook, where the algorithms are tweaked to get you to click, click, click. You see this with YouTube, and you even see it in workplace technology like Slack, for example, which is a favorite example of mine. And I don't know if your listeners noticed this, but Slack ferociously warned you multiple times to turn on desktop notifications. They're basically saying, pay attention no matter what.
If you don't, right?
Exactly. Well, which is ludicrous because I mean, Slack most of the time isn't that useful for what you're trying to do in that moment.
Right.
So all of these guys are trying to capitalize on your attention, and they use lots of tricks, which we kind of know about, but we haven't really thought about where they come from.
And none of them are any big in isolation, but when you add them all together, it takes up a huge amount of brain space, so you can't get your shit done.
Exactly. It induces us to switch from task to task more. We end up with zillions of notifications, usually for messages that don't matter.
Right.
We have a lot more fear of missing out.
Yep.
And ultimately, it takes us away from more important activities. And what's kind of lost in the process is not just our attention, but to your point earlier in the
Yep.
conversation, are sleep.
So
And
now
when
we
you
got.
start to cut down on sleep, you radically reduce your cognitive capabilities.
So now that we have the premise, let's talk about this in the context of talent and recruiting. We talked in the pre-interview about the importance of finding a compatibility between how the company does work and the person's work style, the candidate's work style. Can you give us some color on that? And how would you propose we actually get at that compatibility? Because if it's not compatible, the person, no matter how smart or talented they may be, it's not going to fit.
Yeah, I mean, and it's a tricky question. I think there's some easy ways to see compatibility, and then there's some other ways where you could probably spot it as you work through a project with them, which I'm assuming many of your listeners probably do before they make important hires. They like a little bit of a try and buy approach.
Yep.
I think you advocate that as well too.
Yep.
So initially, when I'm trying to hire someone, or have been in the past, I would look at the way that they would react to my communications, for example. How quickly are they answering an email? In particular, a non-urgent email. If they're answering it in 2 minutes or so, I'm usually pretty worried because I don't want employees to just sit there and look at their inbox and reply to things as quickly as possible.
Yep.
Or if they reply to an email in the middle of the night, or they accept the calendar invite in the middle of the night. I would be kind of suspicious. It's like, why is this person working at 1 a.m? Maybe they're not prioritizing their time right. And in particular, if they're going to be hired to be managing other people, I do not want people that work for me and manage people to create a culture where it is expected to be on call 24 hours a day. Because I don't think that makes for a healthy or productive workforce.
And you're going to lose great people if they feel that's now the expectation.
Very much so. Very much so. Yeah. And so I think that some of these are real obvious ways to look at it. I think you can also ask people these kind of questions in interviews as, sort of what's your communication style, what's your cadence, and that will tell you quite a bit about people. Also on projects, like I mentioned, I always try to do a significant project with someone
before you extend the offer.
Exactly.
Yep.
Because
So
I want to
send a test drive. Tell us about the project. What do you do?
And this is what I've done. This is what I've had to do for most of my meaningful jobs as well too. I look at how they interact with me in the project. What times of day, how fast the response times, how crisply they communicate.
So as much as you're looking at the result of what they did, you're watching the cadence of how they did it.
Yes, because none of us in an organization act in isolation. You can have a total rock star that can produce the best work of anybody and destroy your company because of the way that they interact with other people.
Yep.
And so I'm looking for a combination of output and interaction, and I don't want to say cultural fit because I hate that term. I think that's basically like hire people like me, but more like I would say rule fit or norms fit.
Yep.
And that
and
they
different
will
organizations have different ones. I mean, it's not to say these are bad or good. If it's a workaholic culture where you expect and want 24-hour performance and someone to not sleep, which I don't recommend, then that's fine, as long as it matches, right? If you have a place that respects people's boundaries and weekends and there's no emails after 6 o'clock, which I've heard of those companies, then that's fine too. But you got to find the right match.
Correct. And that's not to say, to your point, that that those companies are terrible. I just happen to think that that's not a good way to run a company and don't want to. Right. Additionally, I think that I'm always looking for people that show me evidence that they're getting a good 7 to 8 hours a night of sleep. And if they show me counterindications, that worries me because I know both from personal experience and from working with tired people that they're just not as smart. Well, and that's not their fault. It's their brain.
To be fair, this has been in the news lately, Alex, right? With Elon Musk of Tesla, who's tweeting at all hours, and now the board and investors are actually concerned about mental health questions. And it does beg the question of, are you getting your best performance when you're not sleeping? And that's a whole nother episode we could do, right? But there's plenty of data and science that says without 7-8 hours sleep, you're actually not optimizing your performance.
And below 6, you're radically not optimizing.
Yeah.
Below 6, you're basically driving drunk at work.
Exactly. The studies have shown that, yeah.
Yeah. And so I think like in that sense, the sleep is this critical indication for quality of work. And, technology is actually a really good clue as to how we interact with it and how it will affect our sleep. So, I mean, even if I see someone like texting me at midnight, chances are it's from their bedroom.
Yeah.
And that means
Yeah.
that their phone is on and they're sleeping with their phone. So this may sound kind of persnickety, but I feel really strongly about it because you see people like Elon or, God forbid, our president, and when they say crazy things, it's usually in the middle of the night.
Yeah. Again, the key is not to judge. It's to make sure there's a match between your beliefs and your companies and the candidates, right?
Yeah, very much so.
Right.
And by the same token, like when I've been in companies that have that 24/7 mentality, I don't like it.
Yeah.
I don't think, and frankly, I don't think I'm doing my best.
We also talked earlier in the pre-interview about cognitive ability, which is the ability for someone to really think through and tackle a problem, sometimes in isolation, and really just, I don't know how else to say it, but thinking time, right? With a capital T. Tell us about the impact from your research in the book about how technology has impacted that.
So I've done a bunch of research and reading on this over the years, and I'm a big fan of a guy named Cal Newport who wrote a book called Deep Work. You probably heard of it. Is computer scientist at Georgetown.
Yep.
Or I think maybe George Washington, forgive me, one or the other. But basically, I believe that the interruptive nature of technology has shortened our attention spans to the degree that for many of us, we cannot focus for the extended periods that are really required to do the most valuable work that companies need, and frankly, that we need to advance our careers and be excellent at what we do. And I think that that's not by accident. Tools like email, text, Slack, Facebook, all the notifications, they're designed to interrupt us and to slice up our life. And yes, we can manage that with do not disturb, but it's pretty clunky. Basically you just have to turn off the phone, and that's almost the only way you can do it these days.
Yeah.
So,
and then someone knocks at our cubicle the next 5 minutes, right?
Exactly. Yeah. No, and so like I actually look for people that I think have work styles that can accommodate that type of deep thought, in particular when they need it. So like if you're a manager, yes, you're probably in meetings 8-9 hours a day if you have 8 direct reports. Okay. But even there, you want someone that can, if they need to on a Friday, just bug out, spend 6 hours and really analyze all the reports and come up with a strategy.
So how do you assess that in a candidate, that ability to do that thinking, right? That cognitive ability. You can't sit in an interview and ask, are you able to think? And so how do you get at that?
A little sneakily sometimes. So for example, if we're doing a project together and they're doing it in Google Docs, I'll actually, look at versioning and look at how many times they're sort of, how long the duration is while versioning is happening.
Interesting.
Just get a little bit of a sense.
Yeah. And what are you looking for people that aren't familiar with that feature? What is that telling you?
Basically, it will tell you if it goes dark. If you see a bunch of changes in 15 minutes, then it stops for 2 hours or stops for 30 minutes. And this isn't perfect by any stretch. You're just kind of looking at signs of how they're working. Other things you can just kind of get a sense of is, how, and this is a harder one to do, but if you give them a project that's fairly time bound, meaning they have 3 days to do it, it's a bit of a crunch.
Right.
Exceptionally hard to do it well if they're completely distracted all the time. Now, you can make up for that if you have 10 days to proofread stuff, but to actually write something or do something deep in a couple days without that, do it well, you got to be focused.
Yep. So you're actually looking to see, did they cram it in the last hour of the deadline, or did they actually pace themselves and work it through?
Or more accurately, are they able to do it in 24 hours or 48 hours and do it well?
Got it.
Because, yes, they are cramming, but they are spending really focused time doing the work.
Got it. I understand.
And I think it's harder to do it if you're constantly flipping around and checking other stuff.
Before we wrap up, if you were to give one piece of advice to leaders, and most of our listeners either lead a company or lead investments in companies or departments, when it comes to recruiting and this concept of happiness and the impact of technology, what would it be? What would you say can make the difference in avoiding hiring mistakes?
Boy, there's so many possible things.
You can give us 2 if you want. I won't tell anybody.
So one specific thing that I think I would lay out as part of the recruiting process, and frankly for the company, because I think it's healthy for both, is do you have a digital policy? Meaning, do you have an email policy? Do you have a social media policy? Do you have an idea of like what the work norms are so that everybody coming in understands this is what you're expected to do?
Mm-hmm.
And I think for candidates, it's essential because they may self-select when they see it. And even so, if they don't, then they got in there and they were warned. For your employees as well, I think it's essential because then if someone comes in and starts to transgress, they know and they have permission to sort of stand up and say, this is the way we work here.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be some kind of weird showdown because it's explicit.
So what I take away from that, Alex, is if you don't first codify your company's principles around DNA, around how we work together, around expectations, when the email is turned off, that kind of thing, you can't possibly look for candidates who match it because you haven't defined it.
Exactly. Very much so.
Exactly.
And it may even be like a soft definition. So like one of my best CEOs who I worked for ever, his simple definition was we had multiple channels of communication, but you always had the conversation had to start and conclude in the same communication medium. So you couldn't start it in Slack, then move it to text, and move it to email, and this was so he could be sane because then he could organize it.
Yeah, right.
And the other quick thing that I would say as well is, I would say make it explicit that your company, when there's vacation, that everything goes off, that you're expected not to be
right.
on.
We want you to recharge your battery so that you can come back and do your best work.
And your employees are expected to be doing the same.
I think that's great. Alex, we'll leave it there. Tell us how people can get their hands on the new book, Your Happiness Was Hacked.
So we are on Amazon, of course. And if you buy it, leave us a nice review. We'd love that. We're also in most major independent bookstores. IndieBound also has us if you feel like you don't want to give money to Amazon. And they'll let you buy it through the local bookstores. And, of course, Barnes & Noble.
Great. Thank you so much for making the time today. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Jeff.